Chapter 3 Sundays at Sea. Sunday, September 7th. Falling with the northeast trade winds. This morning we caught our first dolphin, which I was very eager to see. I was disappointed in the colors of the fish when dying. They were certainly very beautiful, but not equal to what has been said to them. They are too indistinct. To do fish justice, there is nothing more beautiful than the dolphin when swimming a few feet below the surface on a bright day. It is most elegantly formed and also the quickest fish in salt water. This day was spent like all pleasant Sundays at sea. The decks were all washed down, the rigging coiled up, and everything put in order. Throughout the day, only one watch is kept on deck at a time. The men are all dressed in their best white duck trousers and red or checked shirts, and have nothing to do but make the necessary changes in the sails. They employ themselves to reading, talking, smoking, and mending their clothes. If the weather is pleasant, they bring their work and their books upon deck, and sit down upon the forecastle and windlass. To enhance the value of the Sunday to the crew, they are allowed on that day a pudding called duff. This is nothing more than flour boiled with water and eaten with molasses. It is very heavy, dark, and clammy, yet is looked upon as a luxury, and really forms an agreeable variety with salt beef and pork. Many, many a rascally captain has made up with his crew for a hard usage by allowing them duff twice a week on the passage home. On board some vessels is made a day of instruction and of religious exercises, but we had a crew of swearers, from the captain to the smallest boy. A day of rest and of something like quiet and social enjoyment was all that we could expect. We continued running large before the northeast trade winds for several days, until Monday, September 22nd, when, upon coming on deck at 7 bells in the morning, we found the other watch aloft and throwing water upon the sails. Looking astern, we saw a small clipper-built brig with a black hull heading directly after us. We went to work immediately, and put all the canvas upon the brig which we could get upon her, rigging out oars for extra studding sail yards, and continued wetting down the sails by buckets of water whipped up to the masthead until 9 o'clock, when there came on a drizzling rain. The vessel continued in pursuit, changing her course as we changed ours. To get before the wind, the captain, who watched her with his glass, said that she was armed and full of men, and showed no colors. We continued running dead before the wind, knowing that we sailed better so, and that clippers are fastest on the wind. We had also another advantage. The wind was light, and we spread more canvas than she did. Earlier in the morning she was overhauling us a little, but after the rain came on and the wind grew lighter, we began to leave her astern. All hands remained on deck throughout the day, and we got our firearms in order, but we were too few to have done anything with her, if she proved to be what we feared. Fortunately, there was no moon, and the night which followed was exceedingly dark, so that by putting out all the lights on board and altering our course 4 points, we hoped to get out of her reach. At daybreak there was no sign of anything in the horizon, and we kept the vessel off to her course. Wednesday, October 1st. Crossed the equator in longitude 24 degrees west. I now for the first time, felt at liberty, according to old usage, to call myself a son of Neptune, and was very glad to be able to claim the title without the disagreeable initiation which so many have to go through. After once crossing the line, you can never be subjected to the process, but are considered a son of Neptune, with full power to play tricks upon others. It had been obvious to all hands for a time that the second mate, whose name was Foster, was an idle, careless fellow, and not much of a sailor, and that the captain was exceedingly dissatisfied with him. Foster, called Mr. by virtue of his office, was but half a sailor, having always been on short voyages, and remained at home a long time between them. His father was a man of some property, and intended to have given his son a liberal education, but he, being idle and worthless, was sent off to sea, and succeeded no better there. He used to hold long yarns with the crew, and talk against the captain, and play with the boys, and relax discipline in every way. This kind of conduct always makes the captain suspicious, and is never pleasant in the end to the men. They prefer to have an officer active, vigilant, and as distant as may by with kindness. Among other bad practices, he frequently slept on his watch, and having been discovered asleep by the captain, he was told that he would be returned off duty if he did it again. The second night after crossing the equator, we had the watch from 8 till 12, and it was my helm for the last 2 hours. There had been light squalls through the night, and the captain told Mr. Foster, who commanded our watch, to keep a bright lookout. Soon after I came to the helm, I found that he was quite drowsy, and at last he stretched himself on the companion and went fast asleep. Soon afterwards, the captain came softly on deck and stood by me for some time looking at the compass. The officer at length became aware of the captain's presence, but pretended not to know it, began humming and whistling to himself to show that he was not asleep, and went forward without looking behind him, and ordered the main royal to be loosed. On turning round come aft, he pretended surprise at seeing the master on deck. This would not do. The captain was too wide awake for him, and beginning upon at once, giving him a grand blow up in true nautical style. "You're a lazy, good-for-nothing rascal. You're neither man, boy, sogger, nor sailor," and other still more choice extarts from the sailor's vocabulary. After the poor fellow had taken their harangue, he was sent into his stateroom, and the captain stood the rest of the watch himself. At 7 bells in the morning, all hands were called aft and told that Foster was no longer an officer on board, and that we might choose one of our own numbers for second mate. It is not uncommon for the captain to make his offer, and it is good policy, for the crew think themselves the choosers, and are flattered by it, but have to obey nevertheless. Our crew, as is usual, refused to take the responsibility of choosing a man of whom we would never be able to complain, and left it to the captain. He picked out an active and intelligent young sailor born in the banks of Kennebec, who had been on several Canton voyages. "I choose Jim Halls. He's your second mate." All you've got to do is to obey him as you would me, and remember that he's Mr. Hall. Foster went forward into the forecastle as a common sailor, and lost the handle to his name, while young foremast Jim became Mr. Hall, and took up his quarters in the land of knives and forks and teacups. Sunday, October 5th. It was our morning watch, when soon after the day began to break, a man on the forecastle called out, "Land ho!" We immediately took in studding sails and hauled our wind, running in for the land. This was done to determine our longitude, for by the captain's chronometer we were in 25 degrees west, but by this observations we were much farther, and he had been for some time in doubt whether it was his chronometer or his sextant which was out of order. This landfall settled the matter, and the former instrument was condemned, and was never afterwards used. As we ran in towards the coast, we found that we were directly off the port of Pernambuco, and could see with the telescope the roofs of the houses and one large church, and the town of Olinda. We ran along by the mouth of the harbor and saw a full-rigged brig going on in. At 2 p.m. we again stood out to sea, leaving the land on our quarter, and at sundown it was out of sight. It was here that I first saw one of those singular things called catamaranes. They are composed of logs lashed together upon the water. The men sitting with their feet in the water have one large sail, are quite fast, and strange as it may seem, are trusted as good sea boats. We saw several with from 1 to 3 men in each, boldly putting out to sea, after it had become almost dark. The Indians go out in them after fish, and as the weather is regular in certain seasons, they have no fear. We met with nothing remarkable until we were in the latitude of the river of La Plata. Here there are violent gales of southwest, called pomperos, which are destructive to the shipping in the river, and are felt for many leagues at sea. They are usually preceded by lightning. The captain told the mates to keep the bright lookout, and if they saw lightning at the southwest, to take sail at once. We got the first touch of one during my watch on deck. I was walking in lee gangway and thought that I saw lightning in the lee bow. I told the second mate, who came over and looked over for some time. It was very black in the southwest, and in about 10 minutes we saw a distinct flash. The wind, which had been southeast, had now left us, and it was dead calm. We sprang aloft immediately and furled the royals and topgallant sails, and took in flying jib, hauled up the mainsail and trysail, squared the after yards, and waited the attack. The huge mist, capped with black clouds, came driving towards us with a blast, and a shower of hail and rain, which almost took our breath from us. The hardest was obliged to turn his back. We let the halyards run, and fortunately were not taken aback. The little vessel paid off from the wind and ran on from time directly before it, tearing through the water with everything flying. Having called all hands, We closed reef and topsail and trysail, furled the courses and jib, and fore topmost staysail, and brought her up nearly to her course, with the weather braces hauled in a little to ease her. As I had now become used to the vessel and to my duty, I was of some service on a yard, and could knot my reef point as well as anybody. I obeyed the order to lay aloft with the rest, and found the reefing with a very exciting scene, for one watch reefed the fore topsail and the other the main, and everyone did the utmost to get his topsail hoisted first. We had a great advantage over the larboard watch, because the chief mate never goes aloft, while our new second mate used to jump into the rigging as soon as we began to haul out the reef tackle, and have the weather earing past before there was a man upon the yard. In this way we were almost always able to raise the cry of "Hail out the leeward" before them, and having knotted our points, would slide down the shrouds and backstays, and sing out at the topsail halyards to let it be known that we were ahead of them. Reefing is most exciting part of a sailor's duty. Reefing is the most exciting part of a sailor's duty. All hands are engaged upon it, and after the halyards are let go, there is no time to be lost. If one is not quick enough, another runs over him. In reefing, the yard arms are the post of honor, but in furling, the strongest and most experienced stand in the slings and the middle of the yard to make up the bunt. The second mate is a smart fellow. He will never let anyone take either these posts from him, but if he is wanting either a seamanship, strength, or activity, some better man will get the blunt and earnings from him, which immediately brings him into disrepute. We remained for the rest of the night and throughout the next day under the same close sail, for it continued to blow very fresh, and though we had no more hail, yet there was a soaking rain, and it was quite cold and uncomfortable, the more so because we were not prepared for cold weather, but more because we were not prepared for cold weather, but because our clothes had been too thin. Oh, Georgie. Talk about stigmatism. We were glad to get a watch below and put our thick clothing, boots, and southwesters. Towards sundown, the gale moderated a little, and it began to clear off in the southwest. We shook our reefs out, and before midnight had topgallant sails upon her. We had now made up our minds for Cape Horn and cold weather, and entered upon the necessary preparations. Tuesday, November 4th. At daybreak, saw land upon our larboard quarter. There were two islands, of different sizes, but of the same shape, rather high, beginning low at the water's edge, and running with a curved ascent to the middle. They were so far off as to be of a deep blue color, and in a few hours we sank them in the northeast. These were the Falkland Islands. We had run between them and the mainland of Patagonia. At sunset, the second mate, who was the masthead, said that He saw land on the starboard bow. This must have been the island of the Staten Land, and we were now in the region of Cape Horn. With a fine breeze from the northward, topmast and topgallant studding sails set, and every prospect of a speedy and pleasant passage round.